Welcome, coin enthusiasts and history buffs, to a journey through time and metal, where ordinary pocket change transforms into extraordinary treasure. Today, we are peeling back the layers of history to explore some of the most fascinating coins ever minted by the United States. From the colonial defiance captured on the Connecticut quarter to the artistic genius of Georgia's peach design, from the mysterious minting errors of Delaware to the packaging scandals surrounding Harper's Ferry, each coin carries secrets that have captivated collectors for generations. These are not just pieces of currency, they are miniature time capsules, each with its own dramatic story of creation, error, discovery, and enduring value. So sit back, sharpen your eyes, and prepare to uncover the hidden histories behind some of America's most intriguing modern coins. The year was 1999, and America was standing at the peak of a moment that felt almost surreal in its perfection. The Cold War had faded into history nearly a decade earlier, and the United States sat alone as the single undisputed superpower on the entire planet, with no challenger in sight and an economy that was roaring forward at a pace the country had not witnessed in a generation. President Bill Clinton was serving his second term in the White House, and under his watch, the nation was experiencing federal budget surpluses for the first time since 1969, something that had seemed absolutely impossible during the painful recession of the early 90s. Unemployment had dipped below 5%, inflation was barely registering, and the stock market was shooting upward with a ferocity that left economists shaking their heads in disbelief. This was the heart of the dot-com boom, a period when the internet was transforming from a strange academic tool into a household necessity, when companies with nothing more than a website and a pitch were going public and watching their valuations explode into the billions on the very first day of trading. Ordinary Americans were leaving stable jobs to become day traders, financial magazines were running cover stories about the new economy, and there was a widespread belief that the old rules of commerce had been permanently rewritten by silicon and fiber optics. The national mood was soaked in optimism, a deep-seated confidence that the United States had unlocked something the rest of the world had not yet figured out, and that the road ahead was straight and wide and clear. It was against this backdrop of extraordinary prosperity and national self-assurance that the United States Mint was preparing to launch a program that would permanently change how Americans thought about the coins in their pockets. The 50-state quarters program had been authorized by Congress in 1997 through the United States Commemorative Coin Act, legislation championed by Representative Michael Castle of Delaware, who had long argued that the nation's coinage had grown visually stale and emotionally disconnected from the public. The concept was simple and brilliant. Over 10 years, from 1999 through 2008, the Mint would release 5 new quarter designs each year, one for every state in the Union, issued in the order that each state had ratified the Constitution and joined the United States. Each state would submit its own design concepts, which the Mint's engravers would refine and the Secretary of the Treasury would approve. The goal was to honor the individual histories and identities of each state while reigniting public interest in coin collecting, a hobby that had been slowly dying for decades as older collectors passed on and younger generations found other passions. The timing was perfect. Americans were hungry for symbols of identity and belonging, and the idea of carrying a small piece of your home state in your pocket struck a chord that nobody in Washington had predicted. Connecticut had been the 5th state to ratify the Constitution, doing so on January 9, 1788, and so it became the 5th quarter released in the program, entering circulation on October 12, 1999. The design featured the charter oak, the legendary white oak tree that once stood in Hartford and that sits at the very center of Connecticut's identity. The story reaches back to 1662, when King Charles II of England granted Connecticut a royal charter that gave the colony remarkable self-governance and autonomy. In 1687, King James II dispatched his royal governor Sir Edmund Andros to the colonies to revoke those charters and tighten crown control over New England. According to tradition, when Andros arrived in Hartford and demanded the charter be surrendered, The candles in the meeting room were suddenly extinguished, and in the chaos that followed, Captain Joseph Wadsworth grabbed the document and hid it inside the hollow trunk of a massive white oak tree on the property of Samuel Willis. That tree stood for another 168 years until a violent storm brought it down in 1856, but its legacy lived on as the supreme symbol of Connecticut's fierce independence and refusal to bow to arbitrary authority. The quarter's reverse, designed by mint engraver T. James Ferrell, showed the oak with its enormous spreading branches and the words "The Charter Oak" along with Connecticut and 1788. It was a powerful image, connecting a modern coin to a tale of colonial defiance stretching back over 3 centuries. When the quarter appeared in the fall of 1999, it landed in a country wrestling with enormous change beneath its confident surface. The impeachment trial of President Clinton had concluded in February with his acquittal, and while the political scars ran deep, the public was eager to move forward. Overseas, the United States was leading NATO operations in Kosovo, a military campaign that felt distant and contained compared to the global conflicts that would define the following decade. At home, the culture was a strange blend of exuberance and quiet unease, a feeling that everything was going brilliantly, but that something somewhere was bound to break. The State Quarters program, with its celebration of local heritage and community pride, offered a kind of anchor in that moment, a reminder that beneath all the disruption and transformation, there were still stories and values that connected Americans to their roots and to each other. People began collecting the quarters with a fervor that astonished mint officials. Children asked parents for complete sets. Grandparents built collections to pass down. Coin collecting, long seen as a niche hobby for older men with magnifying glasses, suddenly became a family activity, and the Connecticut quarter, with its dramatic tree and Revolutionary era story, was among the most popular of the early releases. The mint struck the Connecticut quarter in staggering numbers, producing roughly 688 million pieces at the Philadelphia Mint and approximately 657 million at the Denver Mint, for a combined total exceeding 1,300,000,000 coins. By every standard, this was a massive production run, and for years, the Connecticut quarter was one of the most common coins you could encounter in daily life. It was the kind of coin you would receive as change at a gas station or a grocery store without giving it a second thought. But that very abundance is what makes truly exceptional specimens so remarkably hard to find today. The overwhelming majority of Connecticut quarters minted in 1999 went straight into circulation, where they were handled, dropped, scratched, exposed to moisture and air, and worn down through the simple friction of everyday commerce. Coins carried in pockets and purses and cash registers lose their fine details rapidly. The delicate lines of the Charter Oak's branches begin to blur and flatten, the lettering along the rim softens, and the brilliant, fresh surface the coin had when it left the press becomes dull and tired. Within just a few years, most Connecticut quarters in existence had been reduced to what collectors call circulated condition, showing visible wear and loss of detail. The coins that were set aside in pristine, uncirculated condition from the very start represented only a tiny fraction of the total mintage, and even among those, only a select few achieved the extraordinary grades of preservation that collectors and professional grading services prize. The most desirable specimens display full strike detail, meaning every element of the design is razor-sharp and complete, with no softness in the oak's leaves or the lettering. They must retain original mint luster, the shimmering satiny surface a coin has when it comes off the press, and they must be free of the contact marks and abrasions that occur during the minting and handling process. Coins meeting all these criteria at the highest level, graded MS-67 or above on the Sheldon scale, are extraordinarily rare. The Professional Coin Grading Service and the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation have certified only a handful of Connecticut quarters at MS-67 and virtually none at higher grades, making those specimens among the most coveted coins in the entire State Quarters series. In terms of value, the 1999 Connecticut quarter presents a fascinating paradox. In circulated condition, the coin is worth exactly 25 cents, its face value, because it is so common that there is no market premium for a worn example. Even in lower uncirculated grades such as MS-60 or MS-63, the coin typically sells for only a few dollars, perhaps 3 to 5, because enough of these remain to satisfy demand. The value begins climbing at MS-65, where specimens might bring $10 to $20, and it rises more sharply at MS-66, where prices can reach $50 to $100 depending on strike quality and eye appeal. At MS-67, where true rarity begins, the value jumps dramatically, with specimens selling for several hundred to over $1,000 at auction. The finest known examples, those few coins representing the absolute pinnacle of preservation for this issue, have been known to command prices in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 or more when they appear on the market, which happens only rarely. There are also notable error varieties that draw collector interest, such as coins struck on the wrong planchet or off-center strikes, and these can carry substantial premiums depending on the nature and severity of the error. But for most collectors, the appeal of the 1999 Connecticut quarter is not about money. It is about the story. It is about a moment in American history when the country stood at the height of its power and prosperity, when the future seemed boundless and the past was being honored in a way that felt fresh and meaningful. It is about a tree that fell in a storm more than a century and a half ago, but that still stands, in a sense, on the back of a coin that millions of Americans have held without ever stopping to consider what it represents. The charter oak was a living monument to the idea that people could govern themselves, that they could resist the arbitrary power of a distant king, and that the rights they claimed were worth hiding in darkness and defending with everything they had. That idea, carried forward through centuries and pressed into metal in a Philadelphia mint in the final year of the 20th century, is what makes the 1999 Connecticut quarter something far more than a piece of pocket change. It is a small, round, silver-colored reminder of who Americans were, who they believed themselves to be, and who they hoped they might still become. Imagine holding in your palm the very first coin of the United States Mint's monumental 50-state quarters program, the 1999 Delaware State Quarter. At first glance, it seems ordinary, a piece of pocket change bearing the image of Caesar Rodney on his historic midnight ride. But look closer at the horse's mouth. Do you see a thin, raised line of metal shooting forward, as if the beast is spitting? That is no scratch from a vending machine. That is the signature of the spitting horse era, a fascinating glitch in the massive machinery of the United States Mint that has turned this otherwise common coin into a sought-after treasure for numismatists. To understand this era, we must first journey deep inside the minting process itself, to understand the immense pressure, the unforgiving steel, and the split-second events that created this iconic variety. To comprehend how a coin like this comes to be, we need to understand the three fundamental physical components of coin production: the hub, the die, and the planchet. Think of the hub as the master positive, the very first sculpture of the coin's design, created by master artists and engraved into a piece of steel. This hub is the source. To create a working die, the hub is pressed into a piece of softer steel under hundreds of tons of pressure, transferring the design in a negative, or in Q's, image. This die is what will actually strike the coin. It is the stamp, carrying the negative of the design that will be punched into the blank. The planchet is the blank piece of metal itself, which for the Delaware quarter is a sandwich of copper-nickel-clad layers around a pure copper core, weighing 5.67 grams and measuring 24.3 millimeters in diameter. Before striking, the planchet is not simply a flat disc. It goes through an upsetting mill that compresses its edge, pushing metal up to form the raised rim that makes coins stackable and protects the design. This prepared piece of metal is then fed into the coining press. Now picture the striking chamber. The obverse and reverse dies are mounted in the press, facing each other. The prepared planchet is dropped into a collar, a hardened steel ring that holds it in place. Then, the two dies come together with the force of a speeding locomotive, up to 100 metric tons of pressure for a circulating coin. The metal of the planchet, now softened from an annealing process where it was heated to nearly 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, is forced to flow like cold honey into the recesses of the dies. It takes the design instantly. This is where the spitting horse era originates. A die, after striking hundreds of thousands of coins, begins to wear out. The intense, repeated pressure causes microscopic fractures in the hard, yet brittle, steel. A small crack forms on the reverse die, specifically in the delicate area between the horse's mouth and the surrounding design. When the die strikes the next planchet, the metal of the coin is forced into this tiny crack on the die's surface. This fills the fissure, creating a raised, thin line of metal on the finished coin that was never part of the intended engraving. It is an unintentional, physical scar from the die's own failing health. This is why the error looks the way it does, and it is crucial to know what you are looking for so you don't confuse a valuable error with simple post-mint damage. The spitting horse line is a raised line of metal, a ridge extending forward from the horse's mouth. Because it was struck into the coin by the die, it is a part of the coin's fabric, and it will feel smooth to the touch. This is the key diagnostic. It is not a scratch, which would be a recessed gouge in the metal, nor is it a stain or a spot of corrosion. A scratch is damage inflicted after the coin left the mint. The die crack is raised. The crack itself starts as a thin hairline feature, but as the die continued to fracture, it could become thicker and more prominent. On some specimens, the crack extends from the horse's mouth, while on others it may run further, sometimes even connecting to the A in Caesar. The United States Mint, striking millions of these quarters per day at each of its facilities in Philadelphia and Denver, 401 million in Denver alone, simply could not inspect every single coin under a magnifying glass. The die would have been under constant use, and a small crack could propagate over many strikes. Since the coin still met the basic standards of weight and metal content, and the design was still largely intact, these examples entered circulation unnoticed by the mint's quality control inspectors, who primarily sample-checked coins. It was only when collectors, looking closely at their pocket change, noticed the horse's new, spitting appearance that the variety became known and documented. So how many of these spitting horse quarters survive, and what are they worth? The exact number will never be known, as the mint does not track die failures in that manner. The die that produced the error had a finite lifespan, and it was likely retired and destroyed once the crack became severe or the die failed entirely. But because the crack appeared during the die's life, a finite number of coins was struck before it was removed from service. While not exceptionally rare, it is scarce enough to be a recognized variety. Its value is highly dependent on the coin's condition and the prominence of the error. A coin found in pocket change, worn and circulated, might still fetch a few dollars to perhaps $10 or $15. If the line is very bold and the coin still has a decent amount of its original mint luster, grading around mint state 63 or 64, the value can jump to $20 or more. The real money lies in pristine, high-grade examples. A 1999 spitting horse quarter certified by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC in mint state 65 or higher, especially with the spit line strongly defined, could be worth $50 and sometimes over $200 to a collector who needs it for a complete error collection. While it may not be the rarest or most expensive error coin, the 1999 experimental planchet Delaware quarters struck on a gold-colored alloy meant for the Sacagawea dollar can sell for thousands. The spitting horse remains a perfect entry point into the world of mint errors. It is a physical, collectible piece of American coinage history, a tiny metal scar that tells the story of massive industrial power, the wear and tear of time, and the serendipitous discovery by an observant collector, proving that even in the most mass-produced objects, the unexpected can be found. To truly appreciate the 1999 Georgia State Quarter, you have to look beyond its face value and see it as a miniature canvas, a tiny work of public art that was designed to capture the soul of an entire state. This coin, the fourth release in the historic 50-state quarters program, made its debut on July 19, 1999, and it remains one of the most visually compelling and artistically rich designs in the entire series. But the story of this quarter is not just about peaches and state outlines. It is a story about the people behind the art, the intricate process of translating a state's identity into metal, and the unexpected quirks of minting that can turn a common coin into a rare treasure. When you hold this quarter, You are holding a piece of American craftsmanship, a collaboration between a legendary sculptor of the past, a talented engraver of the present, and a state government that was deeply involved in choosing its own symbol. Let us begin with the obverse, the head side, which features the familiar visage of George Washington. This portrait, however, has a fascinating backstory that ties directly into the artistry of the coin. The original design was created by John Flanagan, a renowned sculptor who won a competition in 1931 to design the new Washington quarter, which was first minted in 1932 to commemorate the bicentennial of Washington's birth. Flanagan's portrait is a classic, a dignified and timeless representation of the first president. For the 50-state quarters program, the United States Mint needed to make a slight modification to the obverse to accommodate the new state-specific reverse designs. The legislation authorizing the program required that the obverse maintain the Washington design, but also include the inscription United States of America, Liberty, in God we trust, and the $quarter denomination. To achieve this while preserving Flanagan's artistry, the Mint assigned the task to William Cousins, a highly skilled Mint sculptor-engraver. Cousins was tasked with modifying Flanagan's original work to fit the new layout. He carefully repositioned some of the inscriptions and added his own tiny initials, WC, adjacent to Flanagan's JF, on the truncation of Washington's neck. This partnership between Flanagan and Cousins is a beautiful example of artistic continuity, a bridge between the classic coinage of the early 20th century and the modern era of state quarters. Now turn the coin over and prepare to be captivated by the reverse, the true heart of this numismatic masterpiece. This design is the work of T. James Farrell, another gifted Mint sculptor-engraver who brought George's vision to life with exceptional skill. The central element of the design is a large, luscious peach, a fruit that has become synonymous with the state. Farrell rendered the peach with remarkable detail, giving it a realistic texture and a gentle indentation that makes it almost look good enough to eat. This peach is not just a piece of fruit, it is a symbol of Georgia's agricultural heritage and its identity as the peach state. This central image is set inside a striking silhouette of the state of Georgia itself. The outline is bold and unmistakable, instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the state's geography. Wrapping around this central motif are two elegant branches of live oak, the state tree of Georgia. These branches frame the composition beautifully, adding a sense of natural grace and stability. Draped across the top of the design, like a ribbon tied around the state's identity, is a banner bearing Georgia's state motto, wisdom, justice, moderation. The choice of this motto, rather than a more obvious peach state inscription, adds a layer of philosophical depth to the coin. The complete design is a masterclass in symbolic storytelling, packing a state's fruit, tree, motto, and map outline into a single, harmonious composition. The artistic merit of the Georgia quarter is undeniable, and in its standard form, it is a beautiful and common coin. The Philadelphia and Denver mints produced hundreds of millions of these quarters, making them a familiar sight in pocket change for years. A typical, well-worn circulated Georgia quarter is worth exactly 25 cents. Even in uncirculated, brilliant condition, a regular Georgia quarter is not particularly expensive, with examples graded MS-65 fetching only around 75 cents. However, the design and its production coincided with a unique and secretive experiment at the United States Mint that would create one of the most valuable modern eras in American coinage. In 1999, the Mint was developing a new gold-colored metal alloy for the Sacagawea dollar coin, which would be released the following year. To test this new alloy, they needed planchets, the blank metal discs that become coins. Since the new dollar-sized planchets were not yet available, a small number of quarter-sized planchets were struck with the new experimental material. These planchets had a distinct gold or greenish hue, weighed slightly more than a standard quarter, and lacked the copper stripe visible on the edge of a normal coin. Some of these test coins, which were never meant for circulation, were accidentally released into the banking system. This error is exceedingly rare. It is believed that only about 20 examples exist across all 5 of the 1999 state quarters, making the Georgia quarter struck on an experimental planchet a numismatic holy grail. Such a coin, if certified and authenticated, can be worth as much as $10,000 or more. The 1999 Georgia State Quarter is a coin of fascinating duality. In its standard form, it is a beautiful and affordable piece of art that represents a state's pride and history. Its rarity is found not in its mintage, but in the exceptional condition of the coin itself, with examples grading MS-68 commanding prices in the hundreds of dollars due to their pristine surfaces and sharp strikes. But the true legend of the Georgia Quarter lies in the experimental planchet era, a story of a secret government test and a fortunate mistake that created a coin worth a fortune. So, the next time you examine your change, take a moment to appreciate not just the design, but the incredible story it carries. Look closely at the peach, the branches, and the motto, and remember the artists who brought them to life. And if you happen to find one that looks a little too gold, weighs a little too much, or lacks that familiar copper stripe on its edge, do not spend it. You might just be holding a piece of numismatic history worth tens of thousands of dollars. Imagine holding a coin that carries not just the weight of American history, but also the echoes of a dramatic narrative involving secret government testing, 11th-hour packaging disasters, and a frenzied crowd of children scrambling for treasure in a sudden rainstorm. This is the 2016 Harper's Ferry National Historical Park Quarter, the 33rd release in the United States Mint's America, the Beautiful Quarters program. To the casual observer, it might appear to be a simple piece of pocket change, a copper nickel disc bearing the image of a small fire-scorched building. But the true story of this coin, its provenance, and its journey from the minting press to the hands of collectors is a winding road filled with unexpected twists, government missteps, and a legacy that has cemented its place as one of the most intriguing modern American coins. The tale of the Harper's Ferry Quarter is not just about metal and minting. It is a story about how a coin's value can be shaped by the circumstances of its birth and the dramatic events that surround its release. The coin's genesis is rooted in the historic soil of West Virginia, where the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers has witnessed some of the most pivotal moments in American history. The reverse design, which is the focal point of the coin, features John Brown's fort, the small brick building that served as the engine house for the Harper's Ferry Armory and the site of John Brown's last stand during his infamous 1859 raid. The design was a collaborative effort, conceived by United States Mint Artistic Infusion program artist Thomas Hipschen and sculpted into the dies by Mint sculptor engraver Phoebe Hemphill. The obverse, of course, retains the classic profile of George Washington that has graced the quarter since 1932, a design originally by John Flanagan and later modified by William Cousins. The coin was officially released into circulation and made available to collectors on June 6, 2016, with a grand launch ceremony held at the historic park itself on June 8. The Mint struck these quarters in massive quantities for circulation at the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, with 434,630,000 coming from Philadelphia and 424 million from Denver. Additionally, the San Francisco Mint produced special collector versions, including a proof coin and a highly coveted silver-proof edition struck in 90% silver. It is in these collector-focused versions, and in the unusual circumstances surrounding their release, that the coin's true rarity and provenance story begins. The provenance of this coin took a dramatic and unexpected turn not in the coining press, but in the packaging department of the United States Mint. In January 2016, shortly after the Mint began shipping the first collector products of the year, a critical error was discovered. The packaging for the 2016 S America, the Beautiful Quarter-proof set, which included the Harper's Ferry Quarter alongside 4 other designs, featured a photograph on the back of the box that was supposed to depict the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park in Kentucky. However, the image printed on thousands of boxes actually showed a completely different location, the Cumberland Falls State Resort Park, also in Kentucky, but entirely separate from the national park it was meant to represent. This was not a minor typo, it was a significant visual error that rendered the packaging factually incorrect for a government-issued product. The mint was forced to suspend sales of the sets, and 12,000 of these sets with the erroneous packaging had already been shipped to customers who had placed early orders. A frantic scramble ensued as the mint scrapped the incorrect boxes, produced new ones, and rescheduled the sales of the affected proof and silver proof sets for late February and early March. For collectors who received the mispackaged sets, a fascinating dilemma was presented: keep them as a unique, limited edition error item, or return them for a corrected replacement. This packaging mistake, occurring so early in the coin's life, instantly created a distinct subvariety within the Harper's Ferry quarter's provenance. The first owners of these coins were not just acquiring a new release, they were acquiring a piece of mint history that had almost been recalled. Beyond the packaging mishap, the coin's physical provenance in the hands of collectors has been relatively straightforward, though no less compelling. The coins from the Denver and Philadelphia mints found their way into general circulation, where they have been handled by millions of Americans, their provenance largely untraceable as they moved through commerce. The numismatic value of these standard circulation strikes remains modest. A circulated example is worth only its face value of 25 cents, while an uncirculated coin in MS-65 condition might fetch around 80 cents to a few dollars. However, the true provenance story lies with the pristine high-grade examples that have been carefully preserved. The 2016 silver proof quarter, with its mintage of 515,205, is a significantly rarer and more desirable coin. Graded at PR68, such a coin is valued around $9 to $10, though its silver melt value also provides a baseline of around $13 to $14 as of current market prices. The real numismatic treasure emerges when these coins achieve the pinnacle of condition. The grading service NGC has noted that a pristine, uncirculated 2016 quarter can sell for as much as $125. There is no single, dramatic owner or legendary hoard that has come to define the coin's provenance. Instead, its value is built upon the preservation of its perfection, the specific mint mark, and the collector's desire for a flawless example of a historically significant design. The 2016 Harper's Ferry National Historical Park quarter, therefore, tells a story that is uniquely American. Its provenance is a blend of historical homage, governmental error, and collector intrigue. Its journey from the minting press is marked not by the passage through a series of famous hands, but by a packaging scandal that nearly derailed its release, and a launch ceremony attended by 1,000 people, where a sudden rainstorm sent everyone scrambling for cover. In a moment of pure theater, a replica of John Brown's fort withstood the storm, and as the ceremonial coins were poured out, hundreds of children rushed the stage, creating a memory that became part of the coin's legacy. The coin's value today is a direct reflection of its story. From the common, pocket-worn pieces that circulate without notice, to the beautifully preserved examples in top grades worth a modest premium, to the unique packaging error sets that stand as a testament to a moment of human fallibility at the highest levels of the United States government. It is a coin that reminds us that the value of a piece of currency is often not just about the metal it contains, but about the stories it carries, the eras it survives, and the moments in history it witnesses.